Harrison Phillips just got traded. The Minnesota Vikings have sent him to the New York Jets. What did they get? What does it mean? And why does this also signal that Elijah Williams is making the roster? We all know that's my guy. Welcome to a special episode of the Real Forno Show.
Hit the right button. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a special breaking news episode of the Real Forno Show, sponsored by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. My name is Tyler Forness. With me, as always, is producer Dave in the top left corner. And let's break down the news right now. Harrison Phillips has been traded to the New York Jets. He is going with a 2027 7th-round pick in exchange for 6th-round picks in 2026 and 2027. Now, here's kind of what that means. The Vikings were comfortable moving on from Harrison Phillips. And it's an interesting one on multiple levels, and we're going to kind of break it down. But before we kind of go super in-depth into the minutia, Dave, when you heard this, you had sent it to me, and I called you unknowingly that you had sent it so we could, because we were going to record an episode for tomorrow night because I'll be at the State Fair, which if you see me at the State Fair, feel free to say hi. But there will not be a show tomorrow because we're recording this tonight. But this was breaking news, so it's important that we get out in front of it. What did you think of this? What was your first reaction to the news?
I was shocked. Honestly shocked. And our buddy Christopher Gates told me I put the wrong last name on the thumbnail.
Did you put Harrison Smith?
Yeah. Oops.
I typed Harrison Smith as well. Well, luckily the thumbnail can be updated. It's easier to update that than for SEO purposes than the title. So that's if we're gonna make a boo-boo, that's a good one to make. I can't tell you how many times when I was typing out Harrison Phillips, I typed Harrison Smith. Right. I did that tonight. So it is more than understandable. So this is an interesting move. Now, there's some details that need to be kind of clarified. One, the Vikings are already on the hook for $1.67 million this year. That is his prorated signing bonus. Now, they did eat $3.7 million of what is his expected total compensation for the season. And that's going to be the $7 million in base salary and $400,000 in per game roster bonus. So they ate half of it. That means that the total compensation or the total money for the Vikings on the cap, it's gonna be $5.4 million. They save $4.3 million on the salary cap. Next year, they're going to save $7.5 million in cash. Now, that's also going to be in cap space, okay? So they are in a rough spot salary cap wise, and they get that savings, and they get plus compensation. Now, 6th-round picks, we can have a conversation whether that's actually worth anything or not. But if the Vikings are going to make a trade, which we'll talk about, a potential wide receiver trade, because of what came out this morning from Tom Pelissero. But it's interesting that they were able to get this kind of compensation. It's honestly, Dave, it's similar to the Zadarius Smith compensation, but instead of a pass rusher, you're getting a run stuffer. And they traded for Logan Briggs earlier in the day from the Cleveland Browns. The Jets basically said, F you, we're stopping the run, baby. And they are committing to the bit. Now, with the Vikings, Harrison Smith, 29 years old. He's 6'4", just over 300 pounds. And he's really good at stopping the run. Does not provide you a whole lot else, but you need guys like him on the roster. With the salary cap crunch next year, the Vikings have decided to kind of move on from him. Is that a smart move? Is that a dumb move? Is it somewhere in the middle? I think we're going to find that out over time. This is obviously has some financial implications. Most moves have some kind of financial implication attached to them just because of the nature of the hard salary cap that is instituted in the NFL. Now, there's the 5-year rolling cap where you have to at least spend 89% of the cap over a 5-year rolling period. But I think it's really important to have the conversation about what this means other than the financial implications. Well, it means that the Vikings are very comfortable with their defensive line depth. And if you were here on Monday night, which I recommend you go back and watch the show, Monday night, we were very bullish on the depth of this defensive line. I've been huge on Elijah Williams. This is a humongous signal that Elijah Williams is making the roster. It is not a guarantee, but his likelihood to make the roster just went sky high. And it also likely means that you're going to see a lot more Levi Drake Rodriguez. But per the beat reporters, I believe it was Andrew Kramer who'd said on Blue Sky that Jalen Redmond stepped in for Harrison Phillips during the scrimmage today, and he was getting the first team nose tackle reps, which is a really interesting one. I wouldn't expect him to be given nose tackle reps, but that is what the Vikings have decided to do. And I think that is really interesting to start off with. Will that continue? I don't know. But I would expect Levi Drake Rodriguez to get a good amount of those reps. And Levi Drake has shown a lot during training camp so far. Go ahead, Dave.
I also read from one of the beat writers that Tyron Dawkins was also getting snaps with the ones.
Well, that's different from nose tackle, though. Getting snaps with the ones versus nose tackle. I'm just talking nose.
Nose.
So
okay.
It sounds like today, because today they had a scrimmage, which Kevin Seifert reads that to believe they're not going to play many of their higher profile guys at all, which understandable. It's final preseason game.
We figured that.
Jalen Redmond was the first team nose tackle during practice. I don't know how much I love that, but I want to see it in action before I really make any kind of determinations, because as like a 3-tech 4-eye, he was really good in stopping the run this past year. And I think he could be really good at stopping the run moving forward. I think it's an overall good move for the Vikings, but you're also taking a really big risk, because not only are you going to trust Jalen Redmond likely to play nose, and if not, it's going to be Levi Drake Rodriguez. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins is a rookie, and he was a senior, former 5-star recruit, hyper athlete, but he's only a linear athlete. And what that means, for those that aren't like super familiar with like scouting terms, linear is straight. So think of a sprinter. Sprinters run straight. They don't run east and west. Receivers and running backs can run east and west and turn that upfield. That is like what you have to do in the game of football. When you're a linear athlete, it's just straight ahead, north-south. That's what Michael Bennett was when he was the running back of the Vikings. Well, Michael Bennett was also a track star. Now, there's a link between those two. Ingram-Dawkins is great when he's moving straight ahead. Doesn't have a lot of bend. Doesn't have a lot of oil in his ankles. Doesn't have a lot of like flexion. And can't like turn the corner. Tom Johnson, when he was the defensive tackle, he could get a little bendy. And he could kind of put his feet into the ground and be able to bend around some offensive guards, but that's just not Ingram-Dawkins' game. So he's going to get more playing time, and they believe he can be really good. Then there's Elijah Williams, who I have to believe that he's in their plans now. And his performance, along with Taki Taimani, still performing up to the level that he did last year. Ingram-Dawkins, Jalen Redmond, those are the guys that made the move. It isn't just one. It's a combination of all of these guys are playing such good football that you feel comfortable moving on from this veteran. Jaden Berry in the comments makes a really good point. You also lose a big voice in the room. He was a captain. That is a factor as well. the one thing that I find interesting about where this Vikings team is versus if another team would have traded a captain like this Vikings team understands a lot more about the business side of things. They treat their players right. Ben asked if there's any chance Phillips wanted out. I think it's a possibility. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's a guarantee, but there is a chance that he preferred to go back east. But he's also from Omaha, Nebraska, and Omaha is like a 7-hour drive from here. And I find that
where's his wife from?
Really
She from upstate New York?
I don't know when they got married because he went to Stanford. So he's kind of been all across the country. He's lived in the Midwest. He's lived out west. He's lived in the Northeast. So he goes to the New York Jets, and it's an interesting one for the Jets. The Jets are just going to try and stop the run. They've got some good edge rushers. They've got Quinn Williams, who's one of the better defensive tackles in football. And now they have run-stuffing DTs to pair with him and really stop big boy football. And it's no surprise Aaron Glenn is the head coach. They want to prioritize that kind of stuff. Aaron Glenn, a couple days ago, was asked, it's a passing league. Why are you focusing so much on? And he's like, is it a passing league? And the reporter's like, well, yeah. And he's like, well, who won the Super Bowl? Eagles. 29th in pass, first to, in running the football. It's everything's cyclical in the NFL, just like everything's cyclical in college. Air raid became a huge thing. Everybody wanted to pass the ball. Defense is countered. Now you've got a bunch of pass rushing defensive tackles, lighter linebackers for coverage. Now you pound the rock and you punish them and you make them get bigger in the trenches. That and everything just kind of keeps ebbing and flowing in that way. And right now we're starting to get into a running game renaissance. Doesn't mean the passing game is going to go away completely, but the running game is going to become more of a focus. And the Jets decided that Phillips was going to be part of their plans. Now, next year, the Vikings are going to save $7.5 million on the salary cap. That is a huge factor here. Now, when you look at the Vikings salary cap space in 2026, they're $65.8 million over the cap. So right now they're going to be approximately $58.3 million over the cap after this move. But here's where things get more interesting. Okay. After this trade, they are going to add another $4.3 million. So it's going to be $30.7 million under the cap. You take away about $5 million for the practice squad, another like $1.7 million for players 52 and 53, and then another $5 million for in-season acquisitions. So you're probably looking at about $17-18 million that you can roll over to next year. So that $17-18 million, well, that's going to take off. So now you're looking at only about $40 million over the cap. And when you look at the big salaries for next year, Jonathan Gennard, $22.3 million. Extend him. Get that number down. Brian O'Neill's in the final year of his contract. $23.2 million cap number, including $18.9 in base salary. You extend him. Cut that down. TJ Hawkinson, $15.4 million in base salary. $21.35 million in cap hit. You can restructure. Justin Jefferson, $24.9 million in just base salary. Restructure that. And what's really interesting when you look at the cap space is they have $26.7 million in projected cap space for 2027. And then 2028, well, they only have they have a lot of cap liabilities, but a lot of that will change over the course of time. So, and they have the ability to get out of some of these contracts. Like Aaron Jones, they can get out of his contract. They cut him pre-June 1st. They save $7.2 million. They eat 6.8, but they save a bunch of money. If you trade him, you can save $9.2 million. So they have options available to them. Same with Javon Hargrave. They can cut Javon Hargrave and save $11 million. Now, they're going to eat 10.5, but you sign a guy like him. They gave him looks like about a $13 million signing bonus. you have to take risks when you're trying to get guys like Hargrave in the building. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You can still save money on the salary cap. Plus, that could be a Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins spot. And they could always try to trade him. There's only $4 million in guaranteed salary, so they could drop the dead money down to $6.5 million, which would be tremendous. There is ways to manipulate and maneuver the cap next year. Plus, if Elijah Williams is as good as he could be, like he could be a rotational player for this team. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, they like him a lot. And there were some people who thought he should be like a day 2 pick because of his athleticism, because of his versatility. He can kick out and play a big edge. He can kick inside and be a 3-technique pass rusher, but he's probably perfect playing that 4-eye spot. I'd like him to be closer to 290 than 275, which I believe he's still listed at, but he's 6'5.5" and he's chiseled. So there's room to put muscle and weight onto his frame in order to get him to that spot. So the Vikings defensive line is still in good shape, Dave. And I think the Harrison Phillips trade in itself feels shocking at first. When I got the notification, I'm like, what? Why are they doing this? Because he's their best run defender. And then you're just getting rid of your best run defender. Why would you do that? Well, they believe in their depth behind him. And I think their depth is very good. So
I was sitting here as we're starting to plan, because we're going to do the final 53 after the game. Which of those interior defensive linemen do you give up? This makes it a little bit easier. Do you keep 7?
I think you could.
You could. Normal 6. But now we have the luxury of keeping 7. Levi Drake Rodriguez could be the one we keep that might have been gone. Taki Taimani most likely would have been gone. Now he may be kept. It's all sorts of things. Levi Drake Rodriguez could be stuck on the pup for, scheduled to return, and we can play roster games like that as well. But there are so many good players that have come out that can play. And they're not going to get rid of Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins and nor Jalen Redmond. And I agree with you on Elijah Williams.
Mm-hmm. Big fan of Elijah Williams. Everybody knows that. I remember when we signed him, I'm like, all right, tell me about Elijah Williams. And I did some research on him, and I found that the big thing with Elijah Williams is that he had this insane amount of production. And that production, it's hard to know how much that's going to translate to the NFL level from the FCS. It has. He's produced really, really well. I'm really intrigued to see how they kind of structure this defensive line, especially because Redmond got all of Phillips' snaps at nose tackle today, which to me is a signal they believe that Redmond can just plug in there at nose. Is that the right move? You and I can argue that until we're blue in the face. I don't think it's the right move. I think he can be fine at it. But then again, I've never thought Harrison Smith was a great nose tackle. I always wanted him at 4-eye.
Harrison Phillips.
I did. See, we talked about this. It is hard.
Uh-huh.
I've always thought Harrison Phillips wasn't a great nose tackle. I wanted him more as a 4-eye, and I wanted a pure nose, which is like the idea of Taki Taimani. I thought was great because you could just kick Harrison Phillips out to 4-eye, and I thought he was better at doing that role. But he wasn't bad at nose. I just thought he could have been utilized better for what he was. I want to answer this question, and from Grandizer 12, asking Dave and Tyler, you said that Phillips was a vocal player. Was that ever an issue with Flores? I know Flores seemed to have issues with vocal players when he was with the Finns. Yes, he did have issues with players when he was with the Dolphins. There were so many things that went wrong with the Dolphins. A lot of that had to do with Brian Flores. The read I get and hearing people talk about Flores now, those issues don't exist anymore. Flores doesn't have the same issues that he did with the Dolphins. This is a player-led defense, and Brian Flores is driving the car. He goes to the players like, hey, what do you think about this? Can you do this? Do you think this will work? And he listens to his players and gets feedback. As the head coach, he was more of a tyrant. It was a Bill Belichick style of head coach. And he learned a lot about how to connect with his players, and he relearned how to just kind of be a human again as a head coach from Mike Tomlin. And those elements is why I think we're so far disconnected from the Miami years, which was 4 years ago now, to where I don't really see that as an issue anymore. But I appreciate the question because I think it's a good talking point, especially when you're losing one of the leaders in the room. I think this was we love our D-line depth. We don't have enough spots to keep these guys, and we need to save money. Another trade, this one's not Vikings related, but another wide receiver trade. The Chiefs are trading Sky Moore to the San Francisco 49ers, and the Broncos traded Javon Vele to the New Orleans Saints. We're going to talk about why both of those matter for the Vikings here in a little bit, but I think there's still more to go on when it comes to this Minnesota Vikings trade with Harrison Phillips.
Skywalking McCarthy will get to your question here in a bit.
Well, let's get to it now. What do the Vikings do with the draft capital from the trade? I think to get both KJ Osborne and Adam Thielen. I'm going to say this about Thielen. I think we need to stop. I'll say this. It would be cool. It would be fun. But I think we're just too attached to what Adam Thielen was for this team that it's just kind of where all of our brains go to. And I think that's okay. But that trade probably isn't going to happen. I think it's better that we kind of try and look elsewhere. And if it happens, let's celebrate it. That's great. It rocks. But I don't think it should be our default for a wide receiver trade. I think we can, as a collective whole, be better about the players that we're trying to target with this trade that are a little bit more on the realistic side. Because even though on paper, the Panthers have some interesting wide receivers, like Thielen's a real pillar of that locker room because he's a veteran, and especially with how young that wide receiver room is. Jalen Coker, Xavier Legette, and now Tedero and McMillan, all in their first or second year. Having a guy like Thielen is such an important voice in helping develop that room, where I don't think the Panthers trade him. Even if it costs them just a little bit of money, that development, I think, is way too important. So I think we need to, on a Adam Thielen trade, and just kind of view it as a pipe dream. And I don't want to piss in anyone's cornflakes, but I think we need to look at other options as far as who the Vikings could trade for from a receiver, because I think those are way, way more likely. That doesn't mean you shouldn't want it to happen, because it would be a cool story to see him return. But I don't think it's going to, and I think we should use our time in a more productive and realistic manner, I guess would be the best way to frame it, in trying to figure out who the Vikings might trade for.
I don't disagree with you there, but there is logic behind it that makes sense. But I don't disagree with you on that. Now, names I've heard are like Tyreek Hill and Chris Olave. That would be a huge reach, I would think.
I'm going to be real. Chris Olave is just half me pulling shit out of my ass because I think everybody knows how much I loved Chris Olave coming out of the draft. I thought he was the closest thing to Justin Jefferson that we had seen as far as his movement skills, his ability to catch the ball, the catch radius, the route running savant. I think Olave is significantly worse after the catch than Justin Jefferson, and he's not the same type. He's not the caliber of player that Jefferson is. But if you want a guy who's the archetype of Justin Jefferson, it's Chris Olave. And I know he's had some issues with concussions. I understand that being a trepidation. Now, I want to be clear. I don't think the Saints are trading him. But I think some of the reason for those concussions is because Derek Carr would consistently throw hospital balls. And I don't think that's going to be an issue here in Minnesota. The Vikings don't throw hospital balls. Kevin O'Connell's route combinations don't really allow for those kind of hospital balls like they had last year in New Orleans. So you still have to worry about concussions with anybody who's had one concussion, let alone a couple. But I'm not as concerned about that as other people because of that reason. Derek Carr ain't throwing him the football anymore, and I think that's a good thing. Tyreek Hill is an interesting one, and we're gonna kind of continue the shift because if you didn't hear, Tom Pelissero reported that the Vikings were interested in seeking out a wide receiver trade. Now, we don't know the kind of level. I have heard that they have, spoiler alert, I have heard that they called about Chris Olave and Jalen Waddle. So you can take that for what it's worth. I trust where it's coming from, but I'm not going to tell you that this is like super, super concrete. But those are a couple of rumblings I heard. And they should be treated as rumblings, not fact. So that's something to at least be cognizant of. And if you
remember, the Saints won't trade Olave.
I don't think so.
They want to keep him for Arch Manning.
I don't know, but I don't get the sense they want to trade him. But I do want to point out, Dave, that if you are a member of the Discord and you are a member of this YouTube channel, you would have gotten that information earlier this morning when I put it in the YouTube members only channel of the Discord, the Rumor Mill channel, where whenever I hear stuff, I will share it there. So that is another fun aspect of the Discord and being a member of this channel, which we greatly appreciate all of you. I know Chuck just got his linked up about an hour or so ago, so he's got access to the channel now. And anytime I hear rumors, that's where it's going to go. And I think that's going to be a heck of a lot of fun. So I'm going to pull up my article, Dave, because I wrote about this. I went and asked at a bunch of beat writers for different teams at A to Z Sports. And I'm like, hey, who are some names that could be on the trade block or your teams would be willing to trade? I got a few interesting ones. One of them was Sky Moore, so we're going to ignore him because he's off the board. Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver Mitchell Tinsley, who got 2 touchdowns on the Monday night game against the Commanders. Miami Dolphins, Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is going to be an interesting one because it's going to cost a good amount to get him. But here's the interesting caveat with Tyreek Hill, Dave. He's due a $16 million roster bonus on August 31st. I'm going to pull up his cap stuff. So right now, if you trade for Tyreek Hill, there's that $16 million signing or that bonus that needs to be paid out. It's an option bonus. So it spreads out over 5 years. If the Vikings pay that, that's fine. They can afford it if they want. It would be interesting because it would kind of go against how the Vikings have really wanted to structure. Like, they're paying young guys. It's not somebody who's 31. The guys who are in their 30s are getting 2 and 3 year deals. So if they were to acquire him without the option bonus, if the option bonus gets figured out, right now, if they were to do that, the Vikings would be on the hook for $10 million in base salary. Next year, they would be on the hook for $29 million in base salary and a $5 million roster bonus and $1 million in per game roster bonuses. So you're looking at about a $36 million cap hit. All of that can be negotiated. That can be whittled down. That can be spread out. You can do a lot of different things with it. But will the Vikings want to do that with a guy who's 31 years old? He's going to be 32 in 2026. I don't think so, but he's available. And it could be for a cheap price because the Dolphins are willing and wanting to move him. Now, we can talk about the off the field stuff. And I think if you separate the player from the off the field, it's a different conversation. If you don't want him because of the off the field, I respect that. completely fine. I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you otherwise. It is a completely logical viewpoint. But we're not going to go with any of the off the field stuff. We're going to talk about this strictly from a football sense. It would give the Vikings 2 years of Tyreek Hill, who is still incredibly fast and explosive in multiple ways. I think that's important. I gotta message my boss. But I find it interesting, Dave. I want to hear your thoughts on Tyreek Hill because it's an interesting conversation. And even if you don't want to just have Tyreek Hill, they're taking a big swing and trying to make that happen.
Well, the whole idea of a big swing, whether it be Olave or Hill, is that you're going to have him more than just 3 games. And you're going to now introduce competition at the wide receiver 2 spot, which is fine. I have no problem with. And then when Jordan Addison comes up for contract extension or renewal, you can let him go if the one receiver you trade for has stepped into that role. I find it interesting. Now, Tyreek being a speed demon, I find interesting as a fit because we don't have that other than Jalen Naylor is supposed to be that and sort of is, but not to the extent that Tyreek Hill is.
Ty Felton theoretically can be that guy too.
How is J.J. McCarthy going to be? Is he going to be happy to have somebody streaking down and just, crank it back and let it fly, baby? I find it fascinating. I think it'll add a dimension to our pass game that we don't, really have. So I'm all for getting a wide receiver. But we'll see. Now, we're getting a lot of crazy sucks at trading. We got an extra 6 for this, just to let you know. We got a 6th next year, and then we swap a 7th for a 6th in 2027.
Look, it's also tough from a fan perspective, and it took me a long time to get there, that when it comes to trades, Dave, you feel like players are worth more than they are. And it's especially hard to see a trade like this when the Saints traded a 4th and a 7th for Devon Vele, who was taken in the 7th round last year as a 25-year-old rookie. And I think that's an important part of this conversation because let's just be honest. The Saints are stupid. The Saints are very stupid. They've always overpaid in trades. But teams,
they've got a Super Bowl.
They do. Teams have always, other trades will set a baseline, but at the end of the day, they also are often viewed as singular entities. Because remember, at Antonio Brown's peak, before he went bonkers, just absolutely bonkers, he got a 3rd and a 5th because he was like a head case. Antonio Brown is arguably the best receiver of the last 15 years. Like, dead ass. Antonio Brown, we know him from his antics on Twitter, the antics with the helmet, and him going kind of crazy. But he is arguably the best wide receiver of the last 15 years. Incredible football player. He went for a 3rd and a 5th. Martavis Bryant, his teammate, who barely did anything and then ended up getting a bunch of suspensions, went for a 3rd. Sometimes players don't get traded for what you're actually valuing them at because the market dictates it. And there are a lot of elements to factor in. Should Sam Bradford have went for a 1st and a 4th? Probably not. But you know why the Vikings paid that? They were desperate. And that kind of thing can really impact a lot of how this business works. So the Saints overpaying for Vele, look, good for George Payton. I don't know how he pulled that off, but that's a coup, an absolute coup from the Broncos. They took a 7th round pick, got a 4th and a 7th rounder from the next year when they drafted a guy to replace him in the 3rd round. Just bonkers stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is bad at his job. Doesn't mean fire Kwesi or any of that stuff, because Kwesi didn't have that asset to trade to that team. It's not a 1-to-1. Now, if we find out, I've seen floating around that apparently another team called about Harrison Phillips today, but he was already traded. Like, if we find out that there was maybe another team that had been talking to the Vikings about Phillips and they ended up choosing a worse offer, and this is on the caveat, it had nothing to do with Phillips wanting to go to the Jets, that's a factor too. Like, there's so many different things with these trades that we just don't know, that it's really hard to fully criticize for a lot of different things. Like, should he have got more for Zadarius Smith? Yeah, maybe. But at the end of the day, what has Zadarius Smith done since he left the Vikings? He's been a journeyman. He spent a little bit of time with the Browns, then he went to the Lions, and now I think he's a free agent. So it's not quite that simple. So it's just a tough one. It's tough to equate it 1-to-1. But I think this is a solid enough trade. I don't mind it. I would love to have kept Harrison Phillips, but financially and where this defensive line is at, I think it's fine.
For those out there that are saying this is a bad trade, Kwesi did bad trades, what would you give for Harrison Phillips? Is he worth a 5th, a 4th, a 3rd, 2nd, a 1st?
I don't know. 2 6ths for Smith and a 7th feels, I don't know, about right. He's also a run stuffer. Elite run stuffers don't go for very much. Mm-hmm. And that's a part of it too. And the salary he has. Yep. If he was a defensive tackle with pass rush juice, he's getting a lot more. But he just doesn't have pass rush juice. And I think Harrison Phillips has been solid. I think he's been a very good run defender. But he became expendable because of everybody behind him. Is it going to work? We'll find out. But the Vikings believe it's going to, which is why they made the move.
I understand the move. It was shocking to see. That's my point. I didn't expect it. But to me, it makes sense. And especially if it leads to, we trade those 6s for whomever. That helps. We'll see.
Yeah. I want to go through a couple more receivers that were kind of brought up to me. Another one from the Miami Dolphins. Those who like to troll me will know the name D. Eskridge, where I famously had Eskridge half a point behind Jamar Chase in my wide receiver rankings in the 2021 NFL draft. I loved Eskridge. I thought he could be really good, and it's just never happened for a multitude of reasons, but he's arguably had his best camp in the NFL this year with the Dolphins. A lot of these are like you give up a 7th round pick or it's a late round pick swap. Mecole Hardman of the Packers. We know Kwesi has never had an issue trading within the division, and Hardman's just seems to be on the way out because of the depth in that wide receiver room. Deontay Johnson from the Browns. He's a little bit of a head case, but he's an incredible route runner and great yak guy. So that is a possibility. We talked about Sky Moore from the Chiefs. Jason Brownlee. He's more of like a big bodied guy. And it's a really interesting one. And then from the Saints, Dante Pettis. It's a bunch of late round guys, but that's kind of what you're getting here unless you're making a big swing. And maybe the Vikings are willing to do that.
Gotcha. D Vega, yeah, we basically did cut him, but we got something in return.
Yeah, that's essentially what this is. It's It's just trading him to get him off the books, and you get a little bit of capital back. Would you like to keep him? Yeah. But they believe that the guys behind him are going to step up and fill in just fine. And we'll find out if they're right. Only time will tell. But I do think that this was an interesting trade, and it's a forward-thinking one because they're trying to get him off the books for next year too. And that was a big thing. So they get out ahead of it and don't just dump him for nothing. They get a good chunk out of this. And now you can roster Elijah Williams and Taki Taimani. So I think it's fine. Otherwise, Dave, unless there's anything else, that's our show.
Well, we got 2 old bloggers this weekend on Sunday.
True that.
And we saw Darren in the chat, no less.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did. He sent me pictures of lobsters.
Ooh.
I'm jealous.
Hell yeah. Well, we will have more coming up on Vikings First and SKOL. Thank you guys. We had over 250 people joining us live. That rocks. Mm-hmm. Don't forget to join the Discord server. The link is in the show notes. We're going to have a lot more there. A lot of fun discussion about this trade has already happened in there. We're going to have more. And we will be back later this week talking roster, the final 53-man roster going into the regular season. Thank you guys so much for joining. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!